Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Tactics Board. Norwich City are back in action tomorrow when they take on Watford in yet another lunchtime kickoff. Let's hope they can continue their fine form in 12:30 kickoffs. The confidence is there after a 5-1 win over Swansea last weekend. They are on the road after just 3 wins in the Championship away from home this season, so there is going to be difficulty there. But Watford have their own problems. They, of course, are in a similar position to Norwich in the league table, so it should be a very interesting game. You know the drill here on Tactics Board. First of all, I'm going to take you through my predicted 11 for the game. Then we're going to break down Watford and maybe how the game might look depending on their strengths and weaknesses and the sort of setup that they provide. Then we're going to take another look at Josh Sargent and how he's impacted things since he's come back. Of course, his first start in that Swansea game, and I think we all saw how important he can be. But we're going to start with that predicted 11. So without further ado, here's the team I think Johannes Torp will choose to take on Watford at Vicarage Road. So I've gone for Angus Gunn in goal, Kellen Fisher at right back, Shane Duffy and Callum Doyle in the centre of defence, with Lucian Mahovo at left back, Kenny McLean, Emiliano Marcondes and Oscar Schwartau in the middle of midfield, with Ante Sienat on the right, Lewis Dobbin on the left and Josh Sargent through the middle. Up front, you'll notice that that team is largely unchanged, and part of that is down to the performance against Swansea. It didn't really feel like a 5-1 game, but it certainly felt like, especially after the second half, the sort of game that Norwich did deserve to win. They dominated most of it, they created a lot of good chances, and defensively, although there were a couple of tests, as the game went on, they got better and they didn't concede too many chances. So I think it's the sort of team that Torp can't really change much after a performance like that, especially with a whole week's rest for his players. But I have gone with the one change, and that's Ante Sienat on the right. I actually asked Torp about Onel Hernandez in his pre-Swansea press conference, and he said that he wanted more end product from the Cuban when he was starting games. Of course, he started against Swansea, and it sounded like it was a bit of sort of fitness management and minutes management to bring him off at half-time, but that did happen nonetheless, with Norwich looking quite tired in that first half, and then Ante Sienat comes on at half-time, gets a goal, gets an assist when his shot clips off the bar, comes back to Emiliano Marcondes for the final goal. And it was overall quite an impactful performance. So I feel like he's got a good chance of starting that game on the right. It sounds like the plan now that Josh Sargent is back available and they've got Mate Jurasek coming into the team before long as well. The plan is that Sienats maybe won't need to play as many minutes as he has in the last few months. Torp talks about a plan to start him for 2 games and then put him on the bench, and to repeat that process over and over for the sort of ideal development from the Croat. So it feels like now's the time for him to come back into the starting lineup, especially after that impressive performance against Watford. And given Norwich, or against Swansea, sorry, I think given Norwich are back on the road, there is an argument that Torrent will go a little bit more solid, maybe drop Oscar Schwartau, put Kellen Fisher in midfield as he did against Leeds and Sheffield United, and maybe put Jack Stacey back at right back. It was a very good performance from him off the bench against Swansea, and it felt like a step in the right direction for him. And away from home, you could understand if Torrent wanted to go for a little bit more physicality, but I think you also have to consider the opposition. Norwich will feel that they can dominate the game much more against Watford rather than in those games against Leeds and Sheffield United, where they were going in as quite significant underdogs. They maybe weren't expecting to have as much of the ball as they will in this one, and they were expecting probably to have to do a little bit more defending than they will in this one. So it feels like the sort of game where Torp can go with a little bit more of a technical lineup, maybe built more to play the sort of style that he wants. And I think just about that he will go with that sort of team, although I wouldn't be completely shocked if he does go with one that's maybe a little bit more physical and change to suit those needs. But I think based on the reverse fixture and Norwich's performance in that one, there is an argument that actually they're much better off going with that slightly more technical team as they did against Swansea. Coming on to Watford, and I mentioned that game earlier on in the season, which tactically will give Norwich a lot of confidence. It felt like actually the way that Watford played really played into Norwich's hands quite a lot. Their formation has gone between a 3-4-3 and a sort of 3-4-1-2. They've gone with that 3-4-1-2 more in recent weeks, with Chakvetadze playing that slightly more advanced role behind the strikers. But either way, they only have the two sort of deeper midfielders playing those either 6 or 8 roles. And Norwich obviously always go with 3. They want to control the middle of the pitch. They want to dominate possession. They want to get their fullbacks in there as well. So actually what we saw sometimes at Carrow Road in the reverse fixture was almost a sort of 5-on-2 overload in those central areas. And that's so important to football, that if you do surrender those central areas in the pitch, you have to defend really, really well. And they didn't do that. So I think that's something that could go in Norwich's favour. Of course, having been in charge for that game and seen how it played out, Cleverley might be considering some tactical changes going into this one. Maybe sort of giving a bit more steel to his midfield and trying to go to battle with Norwich a little bit more. But Torup has always spoken about the fact that if his team can move the ball quick enough, then they can cause problems for any side in that midfield. And I think that's especially true of Watford's setup, and the fact that they only have the 2 sort of deeper midfielders. So there should be the opportunity for the likes of Oscar Schwartau and Emiliano Marcondes to get into those sort of 10 positions where they mainly want to operate, and then try to find Josh Sargent with through balls and try to get him in behind, because actually that's an area where he'll probably be best. Watford are quite good at the back aerially. Pollock particularly is very good at that. They've got Porteous as well, who's quite a good physical defender. So although Norwich want to mix it up, and Torup has spoken about the fact that they can't be too predictable, if they do try too many of those aerial balls, then that will just be meat and drink for those Watford defenders. So the ideal situation for them is slipping the through balls in behind. Of course, we know how good Josh Sargent's movement is and the fact that he can exploit that space. So if Norwich can keep it on the floor, if they can dominate the midfield and get those midfielders into really good positions, then that could be the key to them opening up the game, creating the chances that they need to win it. And then with Josh Sargent up front, you'd suggest he's the best man to be putting them away. Defensively, they need to cope with individual quality, particularly from wide areas. Many of their chances, or Watford's chances, have come from crosses into the box. Bayo in the middle is very good at putting those away. He's a sort of typical striker in that sense. He knows where to stand, he knows where to be, and aerially he's quite good as well. Watford have some of that strength in those wide areas, so there is a little bit of onus on those fullbacks to perform well and the wingers to track back effectively. But if they can just avoid that individual quality, they can defend well in those one-on-one situations, then they should be able to focus on the attacking side of the game, on enjoying most of the possession and then trying to dominate the midfield battle as they did in the reverse fixture. Now, there's no better place to finish than Josh Sargent, who I think underlined his importance in last week's game. It's one thing talking about the theory of how big he is for this team, and another thing actually seeing it on the pitch. And I think he took things to another level against Swansea. Of course, scored those 2 goals, but also was a threat throughout the game, really. We know that Swansea have a pretty poor record in terms of playing out from the back. They've conceded a few goals from that avenue, and Norwich were able to exploit it much better because they had Josh Sargent up front. His pressing is much better than any of the alternatives that Norwich have used in that area. He's sort of that main figurehead, and then you've got the likes of Hernandez, Dobbin, Sienats, who all athletically are pretty good, backing him up and pressing and winning the balls in those high situations. And Watford won't play the ball through the thirds in the same way or as often as Swansea do, but there will still be an opportunity there. They will still play out from the goalkeeper at times, and with Josh Sargent there in a pressing facility, that will give Norwich the opportunity to create chances in that sense as well. Of course, attack-wise, we know how big Sargent is, not only in terms of the direct impact that he has when he runs in behind, when he gets on the ball, when he finishes those chances that are created for him, but also how he opens up the game tactically. After a couple of those runs in behind, the defence tends to drop off, and that creates that space for those midfielders. And I already spoke about the fact that the likes of Schwartau and Marcondes will love to be in those number 10 positions. that just opens up that space and makes it easier for them to do that. If Sargent can put the defenders on the back foot a little bit, it creates space across the pitch to help Norwich play their possession-based football. And of course, his movement is good enough that it creates space for others, like the wingers, like Lewis Dobbin, scoring his first goal for the club against Swansea, and then they can take advantage of that. So in so many ways, Josh Sargent really helps Norwich, and tactically, I think he's such an important part of the way that they do things, not just technically and physically, as of course is quite easy to point out for anyone who watches him play. But either way, he'll be a big part of the Norwich setup for this game. Of course, we'll have every kick of it covered across our channels. So go to pinkun.com/subscribe if you haven't already. We've got a deal on at the moment, so you can save some money while you're there and get access to all of our Norwich City coverage. Thank you very much for joining me on Tactics Board. Of course, I'll see you again in midweek when hopefully we're feeling very, very positive after a win over Watford makes it 2 victories on the bounce. See you then.